with Social Security, Arun asked about a bond that would provide basically standard of living insurance rather than just real price insurance. I was going to ask that if we let people buy into Social Security, don't we have to worry about adverse selection along the lines that David just asked, that Social Security works because it's mandatory, it's a pooling equilibrium. If we let people buy in, only a select few will, or a select group will. And so let me just throw all that out there and ask you to discuss Social Security.
Okay. So regarding Arun's point, I think that the distinction between a CPI-adjusted annuity and some other is too minute to worry about in this conversation. Regarding adverse selection, let me repeat something I mentioned earlier, which is it's true that you know when you're sick. You don't really have a lot of information that you're going to live a long time. So I'm not as worried about the adverse selection problem at this stage. And remember, my proposal is that people be able to contribute a relatively small amount of money into Social Security. For most people, since most people start claiming at 62, it would be equivalent to them having waited until they're 70, which they're already legally allowed to do. And there are lots of these proposals. Guaranteed lifetime income products, GLIP. There's your, Phyllis, there you go. Take that, GLIP. If we're offering GLIPs and we're worried about who's going to provide the A portion of the GLIP, I say for small amounts, let the Social Security Administration do it. We don't need any new bureaucracy. People are already getting a Social Security check. It would just be a little bit bigger. And especially if this is, look, we know most account balances are under $100,000. And I don't know what portion of it you would want in the A, but even if it was all, my $100,000 limit would cover most people. So I would much rather do this than have the fly-by-night insurance company in Mississippi offering some private version of the same thing. And the government should be the natural person to bear the risk of a calamitous increase in life expectancy. I don't know who else is going to do it. This assets that people have are highly skewed. And we're not worried about the people with seven-figure retirement nest eggs. They will go to financial advisors. Maybe there'll be a fiduciary standard that they will have to apply to, but I'm not as worried about them. I'm worried about, and I'm not so worried about the people that are just living on Social Security. It is what it is. That's not what this is about. So we're worried about the people that are making $50,000 to $100,000 a year. So they're not at the bottom, but they haven't accumulated a big nest egg. And how can we help them solve that problem easily? And I think the simplest plan would be some simple default required minimum withdrawal that you don't have to do every year, and you don't have to go to 4 different places to do it. And if you're absent-minded like me, you forget at least one of them each year. So simplify that and allow, and if a company is setting up a default, maybe they take 20% of your accumulated assets and redeposit it into Social Security. That's my plan.
So that leads, thank you, that leads into the next question, which is, it's very easy to set up defaults and choices in the accumulation stage, and we've seen great success with automatic enrollment, Save More Tomorrow, automatic rollover, stuff like that. As a number of people have mentioned, it's harder in the decumulation stage because there's such a variety of circumstances. You don't want to stick someone in an annuity and they wake up 6 months later and say, hey, this is just not right for me. So other than the default you just mentioned, do you see, how much potential do you see for choice architecture in the decumulation stage relative to its dominant role in the accumulation stage?
Well, look, I mean, there's just as much heterogeneity in the accumulation stage.
But it's easy to fix. If somebody is automatically rolled at 9% and they only want to be at 6%, they just cut back. If somebody gets annuitized automatically in the wrong annuity, they're kind of stuck with it.
Well, if it's the whole thing. If it's a small portion, and everybody has Social Security as part of their portfolio. So the question is, how much bigger should that share be? And I don't have an opinion about that. But, there are defaults. There's this notion of smart defaults, which is that you customize the defaults a bit. So you can think of target date funds as an example of that. It's not one default. It's a default that depends on your age. So you could have similar concepts depending on your wealth and depending on how easy it would be to get information from the employee. There are similar issues in the healthcare space, which is not what we're talking about here today, but people are doing a really bad job of choosing healthcare plans. Something else I've written about, people are choosing dominated alternatives, including at a well-known university on the south side of Chicago. And so we can clearly do better than that, than choosing a plan where you're guaranteed to pay $500 a year more no matter how much health care you consume. Look, whatever you do with the default, it's not going to be perfect, but you can, on average, make people better off. And so I agree with you. Defaulting everybody into 100% annuity of whatever form is inappropriate.
All right, tontines versus annuities. I very confidently raised my hand for the 14% annuity when Moshe presented it, and then I was chastened by all the list of considerations that he mentioned that I had not thought of as I raised my hand. How do you feel about tontines entering the retirement landscape?
Is it an apple tontine or an... Go, Riff. I only have one joke. I don't know that I have I do know that I don't have a well-informed view on the trade-offs between the two. I find them interesting and worthy of more study, but I've made a resolution to read the professor's book.
Excellent. Okay. Anybody have any questions? Yes.
Professor Thaler, I agree with all your comments before about how it's a bad idea for people to conserve their assets towards the eventual bequest. But how do we use behavioral economics to force that choice? QDIA's deferred annuities seem like another area where there could be a partial default of 15, 20%, whatever, of an account balance. What are your comments?
Look, I think that a deferred annuity is a very sensible product for some people. And again, in this spirit of smart defaults, I would like to see people studying whether we could identify the class of people for whom that would be sensible. And I'd like to bring up again this notion of maybe figuring out a way to tie it with assisted living. The other thing we haven't talked about today, which deserves to be in the mix, is reverse mortgages. Reverse mortgages suffer from a lot of the same problems. One of the problems is they have a terrible name. People hate mortgages. Adding the word reverse in front of it is not a great marketing ploy, but there are certainly millions of people in places like California that are cash poor and house rich. And there's no reason why taking some of the money out of their house should be in the form of an annuity. Now, how to structure that product, I don't know. These wise people here, I suggest, could think about that as well. And maybe you and Bob could think about that. But there ought, suppose somebody is sitting in $1 million house, which is like a cottage in the Bay Area, or maybe a big garage, and it's paid off, and they'd like to take $300,000 out. We ought to be able to figure out a way for them to do that. And going back to the previous conversation, I think some of what the default should be an emergency fund. And I don't know how to do that. A default savings account. We know there are lots of people that can't put their hands on $5,000. Now, this is all just mental accounting, but we know mental accounting matters, title of a paper I once wrote. So having an emergency account, I would think, should be part of the default plan. Now, yeah, that's just cash, but if it had the name emergency account, and maybe it was housed, with with T. Rowe Price or Vanguard or whoever's managing these assets, and it's called emergency account, maybe that would help, because buying a big screen TV is not an emergency even the day before the Super Bowl.
So one of the themes this morning has been to try to push toward more automatic default choice architecture type of solutions. The other theme has been it's complicated, and people face very diverse situations, and one size fits all may not work. And the mention of these emergency accounts is one of my favorite examples of being complicated, because you would think the obvious thing to do would be to create an automatic enrollment plan where you get like a payroll tax contribution that goes into your bank account. Well, you can't do that because banks have there are things called know your customer laws to deal with terrorism and money laundering, stuff like that. And you can't just open, or Wells Fargo aside, you can't just open accounts for people without the bank knowing about it. So there's interaction of finance, insurance, pension, labor, security law that is it's out there. It's a frustrating constraint, but it's a real constraint. So let me see. Is there one more question we can take? Yes, sir.
Have you seen anyone study, borrowing the notion from defined benefits, the notion of laddering deferred income annuities over time, 75, 80, 85, and then integrating that into a risk architecture that allows you to take more risk in advance of those deals landing?
I mean, Moshe would know more about that than me. So
I think if somebody wants to buy it, somebody is willing to sell it, probably. And hey, let me thank you, Richard, again for this. It was tremendous, and thank you all for staying.
thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.